All right, I'm going to call the Neary Building Committee meeting to order for Monday, April 11th, 2022. It is 7:01 p.m. I'm seeing we have 6 out of our 9 voting members present, plus a good quorum of our ex officios. What I will do first is, Lisa, given you weren't here last time, I don't see the other Jen yet. Just I have a placeholder on the agenda for just brief introduction of yourself, especially to those that have not had the opportunity to meet you before.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Braccio. I currently serve on the Board of Selectmen. I've served on a lot of different committees over time, over the past 15 years. I currently serve on Capital as well with Jason. I'm looking forward to working with all of you to move this along. And I think it's a great experience and a great opportunity for us all. How's that for quick?
You missed the round robin last time, so glad to have you here, Lisa. And if the other Jen comes, I will fit her in to just give a quick background of herself. First action item is approval of meeting minutes from March 29th, 2022. Greg, thanks to your team for getting these drafted and over so quickly. Did anyone have any comments that Andrew can make notes of before we take a motion and a vote on them?
Jason, I just realized that I think it just came to you and I, so I actually forwarded that to you.
I sent it to the whole committee. Did everyone not get it? I see Mark and Jen putting the thumb up. Andrew, did you not get them?
Oh, I got it.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments on them? Go ahead, Andrew. Andrew, you sound like you're on a spaceship somewhere, unless that's just me.
This should be better, right?
Yeah.
Much better.
Just your name that was spelled wrong.
All right, we'll get that fixed. And then the document at the bottom, I don't think they knew what we had in front of us. I would say the charge would have been the only document that was referenced, unless anyone thinks differently. All right, is there a motion to approve the minutes with those 2 edits?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, roll call vote. Braccio,
Abstain.
Davis,
Yes.
Donato,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Bath,
Yes.
and Malinowski's aye, so it's 501. Next item on the agenda is question from members on history of project and progress to date. Before I kind of open the floor for a round robin, realizing that some of you probably have more questions than others, is I had a to-do from the last meeting of trying to gather who wanted hard copy documentation, who wanted electronic. We've obviously circulated a ton electronically after the meeting. Thanks again to the school administration team for gathering all that so quickly. What I've decided to do, instead of guessing on who wants what and who needs what, we will print for each of the voting members a full copy and have those left at the townhouse. I'll let you know when they're printed, but I felt like that was the easier way to go than trying to do a straw poll and miss someone accidentally. So for each of the voting members, we will print the legacy materials just so you have them, given that we're probably gonna have to come back to them a few times. And I'll just let you know when they can be picked up.
Hey, Jason, if I may,
Sure.
I don't know if I wasn't on those emails. I've received nothing. I didn't get the minutes and I've got no other subsequent materials.
Okay, so there's probably an issue with the mailing list. Is anyone else in that boat?
I
I
didn't.
don't know if I got
didn't-
them.
Yeah, I had to go into the Neary group and then it brought me to another email area. And then I found them, but I'm not sure if that's what happened to Lisa.
Correct,
Jason,
sir.
I'm just noticing that it looks like Anarata is in the,
I just pulled her over. Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Okay, so Lisa, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find those two now. The problem we continue to run into that I've asked Jay Montijo, our IT manager on the town side, to deal with is we obviously have I think the school team's actually getting my emails, ironically enough. Some people have town emails from other committees they're already on and should have been added to the group. So Lisa will go in after and check that.
Thank you.
And then those that are newer, I know, Mark, we resolved yours today. Jen, I know we've been back and forth. And Inarada, I think we probably have some more to do on yours, but I'll make sure you get them, Lisa. But it's probably documents, in fairness to you, you've seen numerous times already. So with that being said, are there any questions that has anyone left the meeting last time that they either want to get out there, want to see more information, if it exists at this point, or any kind of thoughts you just want to put on the table before we go to our main action item for the night in terms of discussing the feasibility study and the amount that's on the town meeting warrant? And I'm mostly looking at, go ahead, Andrew.
I was gonna say, I still wanted to see the school if we can get an opportunity to do that.
Greg, I don't know if you have any thoughts of the,
Yeah, so Keith and I did talk about this, and the week after April break, so the week of the 25th. So later in that week, we can schedule visits. And late afternoon, early mornings, do people have a preference? Evenings?
what's easiest for your team, Greg?
Early mornings work well. So anytime after 7, I would imagine around a 45-minute tour of Neary would suffice.
That would work for me.
Is there anyone that would not work for? Okay, we will circulate maybe a date, and obviously if there's, naturally there will probably be someone that it doesn't work for. We can certainly find other arrangements for that. Okay, so Keith, I'll connect with you if that's the right avenue, or Kathleen, whoever's, tell me.
Yeah, Kathleen and I will work together, Jason, on that. But
Okay.
any of those mornings later that week would work.
Okay. Andrew, do you have anything else?
Are we looking at both schools? Or are we just looking at the Neary building?
That's a good question. Certainly we are the Neary Building Committee, but understand that there is, obviously, we did talk in the last meeting about the larger footprint in planning, given if this were to move forward, some of the discussions related to Woodward. So do you think it would be helpful to you, Jen? Is that kind of the request?
I'd like to see like what Woodward looks like, because I know it's a newer school and it is currently, home of 2nd and 3rd graders. So I would be interested in, yeah, it would be. I would think it would be helpful for me.
Okay. Steve, is that the same schedule for you, like early morning?
Yeah,
We
that'll
start
work.
roughly at the same time, right?
Yep, that'll work. So we can either schedule for the same day, Jason, if you would like to go to one building and then the next, or we can do it on a separate day.
What's the committee's preference? I know that will bump up against those that have to get children to schools, will also be an issue potentially, unless there's coverage. So you want to do it back to back or 2 different days?
I would just say make it a whole day of school touring, but it's my opinion.
Okay. All right, let's try a back to back and go from there. All right. All All right, other committee members with questions unrelated to the feasibility study, just on observations, etc. Nothing? Okay, we're ready to move on to the next item? Okay, so I'm going to move to discussion and vote on feasibility study article on the 2022 annual town meeting warrant. So I'm going to bring John Lemieux over as well. He's from Vertex, and we'll give a little background of, allow him to give a little background of himself if he's in a good spot. I know he may be driving. And then walk through some documents that were provided. John, I have you in the room. Oh, you're in your back.
I made it back.
Before we get into any of the details, John, if you could just, I know a few of us have the opportunity to meet and work with you before, just give
Sure.
your background and why you're here.
Okay, because I have nothing else pressing on a Tuesday night.
It's
No,
Monday, by the way.
no. My name is John Lemieux, with a company called Vertex. I've been at Vertex for over 20 years. I primarily, all the work I do is owner's project management work. I met Jason a number of years back when we were OPM for your public safety building project. And Jason had some questions for me as you guys started on this process a little bit about the school and with the MSBA. Our firm currently is building, I think, 4 or 5 separate schools. We just finished an elementary school in Westboro. I'm currently working on a middle high school for about 900 students in Pentucket, the Pentucket School District up in West Newbury. We've also doing projects in Westwood and Walpole and a handful of other towns as well right now, all in various stages. So, when Jason said, that the town was looking at starting this process and he had some questions, it was easy to just, kind of help out. We looked at some data for him. We also, actually, let me rewind a little bit. My company also did a facilities assessment of the Neary, not my group, the actual people who do property condition surveys, to kind of give you some background on some of the systems and the roof and, all of that helped you put together the statement of interest that went into the MSBA that got you the invite into the program, or into the start of the program. So, I know that you're here tonight to talk about the number. I know it's not a small number, and can kind of give you some thoughts and insights on how that was, kind of put together and bounced around.
And I think, just for full transparency, obviously the warrant article has been in writing for a couple months now. So it was at the time the school research subcommittee was still in existence, and Greg, Keith, Becky, I believe, were on the phone, Roger Challen, school committee chair, and myself as capital planning chair, had an initial meeting with John just to figure out what number to put in the warrant. And I think it's important really to understand that discussion, because that's the baseline for what we're discussing here tonight. And during that meeting, John literally opened the MSBA website, which was pretty eye-opening to me, which has all of the data for every project that they have been part of the funding on. Keep in mind, not every project goes through MSBA, but a good majority in the state of Massachusetts do. And we looked at various comps. At the time, there was still discussion of grades 3 through 5 versus grades 2 through 5, and whether, what the size would be. But the analysis John was referencing, he worked on with Kathy Cook, who was a member of the subcommittee that Couture and I are on. Kathy's the current chair of advisory as well. And John basically took the data from our internal and external enrollment studies that the subcommittee was working on to find the right comps that you find in the spreadsheet here. And my initial reaction was, wow, this is all over the place. Like, help me, like what, how do you come to the right number? And I think that the two things that got me comfortable as just one member that has seen this probably, this data, at least probably more in advance of the meeting, was this budget, whatever ends up getting approved, if it gets approved at town meeting, is under the control of this committee. And we as voting taxpayers will make choices on vendors in consultation with the MSBA if we continue on in the process, if they bring us into that phase after the 270-day window. And it's really important that we look back at projects, because one of the first things voters say in this town, and probably every town, is if we approve an amount, we're gonna spend it. And I don't necessarily disagree with that methodology in general, because usually that's what happens, right? And some projects go over. But I think for at least the members of this committee, it's really important to note that is 800, is 900, is a million, is 950 the right number? We need to give ourselves some flexibility to find the right vendor. I don't think anyone can turn on the news these days and hear the word inflation without hearing the word inflation in every walk of life. I think one of the things we all realize that also happens in the professional services world as well, which is where we'd be going with this funding. This funding is not only for engineering / design work at this point in time. We would also be required under state law to hire an owner's project manager. An MSBA would walk us through this process. So what we're looking to do with this number is give ourselves enough room to do the analysis that would be required for the voters to make informed decisions, and not put us into a bucket that we may only have certain vendors that we could work with because of their desire to take on a project. So what we somewhat are doing with this number is signaling, if the voters are okay with it, that the town is ready to go and ready to really advance this phase. Going with a lower number for a project of the size, at least the enrollment, the enrollment data we have right now, could signal a lukewarm approach. And remember, one of the guiding principles that the superintendent and I walked through from our MSBA discussions early on at the last meeting, MSBA is watching every step of the way, the level of community involvement and broad community support. And that goes beyond just the school community. That's why it's also important that we don't go too high, right? And just arbitrarily fund a number, but also go too low. So that's kind of my opening of how the number came to be. The reminder I'd also give you is that this would be a bonded project. So the treasurer, who I don't see here tonight, would not bond it until he has a general idea of what contracts or phasing or staging we've gone in. So just because you have an amount authorized does not mean it's an amount you're going to spend. Will we spend more than 950 during the course of these endeavors, whether it be renovations, repair, new construction? Of course. And you can also roll it into future phases if the money goes unspent. So just for those that don't understand or haven't followed some of the dynamics, that's some of the things that we learned as we went through kind of the initial process of trying to come up with a draft for people to react to. So with that, I just ask for hands if anyone has questions for either the superintendent, school administration team, myself, or John. Go ahead, Katura.
Okay, so that was great background. And so when I'm looking at the feasibility comps spreadsheet that you sent out, and this is really helpful to see. There seems to be a fairly wide variation in terms of how much it actually ends up costing. I'm wondering do we know for some of these, does the cost go, is it on the higher side? Does it end up being on the higher side for the feasibility study, the more grades you include? Because you can't tell from this chart how many grades are in, you could have, so there's one where the feasibility was, they're all lower enrollment. Are they fewer grades? Is it, are we thinking that 950? I don't think it's an unreasonable number. I think it actually makes a lot of sense based on just looking at these comps, but I'm just curious about if the number of grades affects the analysis.
The amount of, the amount of grades isn't really, I don't think, is taken into consideration. It's really the number of students, because some of these schools could be 2 grades, some could be 4, some could be 5. It's all dependent on the district itself. So basically, in the whole of the MSBA program, enrollment drives the program drives the square footage. So once you agree with the MSBA on the size of your, how many kids are going to be in there, and you may think one thing, and they're going to have their own enrollment studies as well, and they're going to come back, they may tell you more kids, less kids, or somewhere right in the same ballpark. And from there, that starts the calculation of their equation of the maximum money Southborough could see from them as a partner in this process. If you want to build bigger and more square footage, you can, but it's all not eligible. As an example, in an elementary school, some towns might want to put in an auditorium. MSBA doesn't pay for auditoriums in elementary schools. They pay for cafetoriums. They pay for spaces that are multi-purpose. Have there been towns that have done a bigger gym or a bigger, type, performance space? Absolutely. But that all becomes on their, on the town's dime. So it's a slow, methodical process. I can also tell you that, as far as feasibility and schematic goes, it's really in depth. I mean, the MSBA doesn't invite communities in for them to hopefully get to a point and the voters say no. They want this to be as thorough a process as can possibly be, so that if John Q. Public picks up the phone and calls them and says, well, they didn't consider this site, or they didn't consider this building in this location, this is such an iterative process. They will require you to do, to look at renovation, to look at new, to look at addition renovation, to look at 2 stories, 3 stories, all these different kind of, options, I should say. And the whole of the process is many options reduced to the few options, reduced to the one option. And it's at the end of that process, you're really looking at contracting with a couple of firms to take you all the way to schematic design to get to that point where you would put that big number in front of the town. This is when you start this process with them for an elementary school, it's about 5 years. I mean, this is, hope you all like each other, because if this goes, you're going to have a lot of these meetings, and it's iterative. It's a good process, and they are very, very fair. They lay out their rules and they apply them with 0 amount of flexibility, which is good, because then you can at least understand what you're getting into. And again, you don't know, the other thing too with the comps that I'm looking at, again, remember those comps are all in dollars in the year that's listed. So in November of 2015, $1 million for a 92,000 square feet, you would have to escalate that 3 to 5% a year by 7 years. You're going to be way over the 950 if you were to make that comp in today's dollars. So I wouldn't, they are varied, but they're not leveled. These are the dollars as they were approved by MSBA. So, bigger numbers that are older would be much bigger numbers nowadays. And again, what drives that? It's also, sometimes it's location. If it's a tough place to get to, you're going to be paying more expenses for people to get to and from where you are. What's the current market? Other projects? Is there a lot of work? Is there a little work? So everything is, it's tea leaves, some of this. When you look at prices of buildings, if you remember, your public safety building still goes down in history as the best deal I've seen in years and years and years. Sometimes you just hit it right. And and that's, if we could have forecast, if I could forecast that on every job, I could get paid a lot more for what we do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Go ahead, Greg.
So John, when we met with the school research subcommittee, you had explained, the amount of the feasibility and the company's willingness to work with this type of project. Can you just speak to that a little bit? Because that was helpful for me to understand
Sure.
companies' willingness to partner and for the longer benefit of a project.
Absolutely. So basically, you will have to hire 2 groups of professionals to do this. Once you get through the eligibility period, if when you get the next nod from the MSBA and they say, okay, Southborough, you submitted all your stuff, looks good, let's go. Next thing you do is form the team. So you're going to go out and you're going to have to hire an owner's project manager. And a lot of OPM's fees are really based on time. You're buying people's time for a period. And so your OPM fees will be, X times Y equals Z. And then you'll get to the designer. And then the first thing the OPM does with you is helps you put a request for services out there and deal with the designers. But when you do that, you have to tell them how much money you have. You have to give them the ballpark of the budget. And, to Jason's point, I think that, these numbers, and again, you don't have to give them, you're giving them a range, but ultimately, if you even said through this, we start to get numbers, it looks good. We're going to publish the fee for the designer at 600,000. Doesn't mean that people are going to say no. They know that that's what you have to work with. We've had situations on other jobs where the fee was a little bit lower, fee was a little bit higher. People are in this for the long game, because let's face it, if this project is a $60 million construction build, that's a $6 million contract plus or minus for the architect. Are they going to pass up what could be a $6 million job later, for $100,000 now? No, the answer is no. So they will work with you. But also, to Jason's point, if you said you had $200,000 to do both the OPM and the architect, you wouldn't get a whole lot of responses, because the amount of work the professionals know the MSBA is expecting. I mean, when you finally submit the schematic design, which will be the end of this process, the number that goes in, and the town will hopefully authorize, and the MSBA would say yes, it's more than the schematic design level of detail that we see on all of our other projects. It'll have more detail in it than the schematic design at the public safety building had, or most other normal municipal jobs at that phase. Just because they've gotten so good at this, everybody understands what they expect. So it's like a schematic design plus. You're actually a little bit further along for when you finally do get that green light from the voters, when you jump into the next phase, which is design development. You've actually kickstarted the job a little bit. So it's very, very thorough. And again, just to Greg, to your point, most of the firms will work with you. We've never not done a job for somebody who was open and said, can you work with this? Again, but just a quick caveat, you're choosing these professionals based on qualifications, not cost. That's the golden rule with OPM and design services. You want the best fit for the town, and then you work out the price after. If you can't work out the price, you move on to the second place firm.
I do see you have a member of the public with their hand up. I just want to make sure the committee doesn't have any questions on what's been presented to date before I go to that. Okay, Kathy, I'm going to bring you over. Floor is yours.
Hello. Hey, John.
Hey, Kathy.
So the reason I'm listening in tonight is advisory's got to take a position on this warrant article, and not only take a position, be able to support that position. Andrew Pfaff is here tonight, who's also on advisory. I think advisory is probably going to support the article. I have no reason to think otherwise. So I'm really to the next phase, which is what we say in support when questions get answered. Because what you're hearing right now from people who are fairly astute financially is that the number just sounds high, and it does sound high. So my question to you is, if the article passes, it says not to exceed 950. So we got up to 950. When we go out to try to find the two sets of professionals, the OPM and the architect, are we asking them to sign a fixed fee contract that's based on hourly rates, but not to exceed? How do we know we're going to have enough money to 950? The reason I say this is I appreciate what you had to do to come up with 950, but remember, this project's pretty complicated. We've got several permutations that have to be looked at before we decide which way to go forward, which means more time and work. We don't have a brand new building being built, and that's what we're doing. We could have, that's one of the choices, but we could also be doing a significant rehab of an existing building, a partial rehab. We think we need to possibly expand what we have if we don't build a new one. So there's lots of different things that are going to have to be looked at to get to the point that we know what we're going to do, right? So I assume the answer to that is we ask for more money if we have to. So don't dwell on that one, but just when we go out to bid, are we trying to do fixed fee contracts not to exceed, or are we just truly based on hourly rates?
So I can tell you that the OPM contracts are based on a hourly rates not to exceed number. And also the designer contracts are also fixed fee to get to a point. Everybody understands who plays in this pool that your number is finite and that there is no return to town meeting. So if I were counseling you on this and you had 950, I would tell you to keep a chunk of it aside and then go buy your OPM and your designer. And why do you say, well, why keep a chunk aside? Well, because you're never going to know until you get started how many pieces of property the town is going to want you to look at, how many places you're going to have to dig some holes in the ground to see if it's feasible or if there's ledge, to try to understand the kind of those nuances. And if you max out that budget, then whoever's working for you is coming back to Jason and saying, okay, what else do you have? And that's not how that's not how it works. So, you know, the first order of business with your OPM, once they're under contract, is to then decide, okay, how much of this money are we going to put out there as the budget? Because you don't have to agree to a price, but again, you need to let the designers know, okay, how much do they have? And then, you go through the interview process, you go through the design selection panel with MSBA. They say, okay, we agree with you. We're going to pick this firm, and then you negotiate the fee. And all of the firms that will put in for this will be qualified and will likely have done this at least a few times before, so they understand this process. More importantly, they understand the deliverables that the MSBA is going to expect to see, meaning that they understand the level of effort it's going to take to do that. And if they choose to, work with you, they know up front that, okay, Southborough only has $650 to give us to do this work, or whatever that final number is. So you're locked in, you're protected.
Okay, not for me. So Jason, all I would suggest is maybe put a slide or two together for town meeting that shows where the number came from, so they know that this wasn't pulled out of thin air. Because again, I think you're going to have a general reaction that it sounds high, because it is high.
The other thing I can tell you too, Jason, is the contracts that the firms have to sign. They're on the MSBA website. There is no flexibility with those. You have to sign. If the MSBA is your partner, you have to the consultants have to execute agreements, standard form agreements that very clearly explain how the fees are paid.
Okay, that's all I need, Jason. You can
I will
you can
move
delete
on.
me.
Thank you for the comment.
See you guys soon.
She popped up before I could pop her out. So I think before we are there any other questions specific to the feasibility articles? I do want to go to Kathy's point about education of the public, and then I think we can take a vote as a committee to either support or not support the amount in the warrant article. So are there any other questions before we go on to what I'll call public education?
I have one more question.
Good, Katura. Then we'll
So
come
I
to-
mean, I know we already put the number 950 out there, but all this talk about it is what it is and there's no going back. And when I look at the comparables, we're doing, I guess we're very comparable to, let's say, Ashland, but that was a year and a half ago and it was more money, but it's a really, looks like a similar enrollment. And so are we confident that this is enough? I mean, I maybe part of the choosing of 950 was we didn't want to, go above 1 million because that, is even more sticker shock. But I don't know. How do we feel? But I mean, I hear what you're saying, John, about how they'll say, well, we're not going to give it up for $100,000. But then, I don't know what the competition is like right now. I mean, is it,
So, listen, I will tell you that MSBA work is great work and everybody likes it because it's great. It's great backlog. It's a relationship with a community for 5 to 7 years. It's 7 years if it's a middle high school, if it's the size building, we're doing right now in the North Shore. What I would also tell you is that, a designer or an OPM will be very frank with you. If for whatever reason it starts to look like it's not going to be enough, it's a frank discussion and say, listen, we know we're going at this at risk. And just if we get to phase 2 and the job gets voted in, well, I may have to charge you a little bit more for phase 2 to make up for phase 1. Totally acceptable. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone understands that, does this work? It's public money and public money is hard to get. Like if as a group, you said, man, we need to respond to this and make it 890. I don't think you would, if someone made a motion on the floor, to change that, if everyone felt better at 890, 899, I guess you could do it. I don't think it would really change much about who comes in. Maybe you lose somebody if they're really busy. I mean, but the MSBA slate of work is the MSBA slate of work. You're in a group. You're always in a group. There's always other projects coming along. So, aside from some places having some slight resource issues because of, personnel and hiring and all of that you hear in other places. I mean, I haven't heard of places turning down work. Haven't heard of it. We haven't turned down any work. It's a great question. It's good to keep, eyes on the ball, but every community is different and it really is. So comps are great, but they're not great because, you have your own situation in the 4 borders of the town within the 4 walls that you have to deal with. And sometimes it's a perception thing as much as anything else. I will tell you the amount of work that will get done for this fee, it's crazy how much work there is to get one of these things to the point where you're asking for the big ask.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I thought the same thing. I am afraid of a 7-figure number as opposed to a 6-figure number, to be completely honest, but I approached it from, let's not forget all the work that's already been done, right? Both with third parties and internally, the cost of that labor. And that's part of the MSBA process that we candidly are 2 steps ahead on than some of the groups that are going in now. And I don't think we can discount that based on what we heard in some of those preliminary views of why MSBA was entertaining our request in the first place. So.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Okay, good.
Anurad, I saw your hand was up.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask, this number is based on amount of enrollment, I heard. So if have we decided on the grades? Like I heard we don't need to decide on the grades, it's dependent on the enrollment, but those 2 go hand in hand, right? Like if we have more grades, we'll have more enrollment.
Let me start and then I welcome others to weigh in. Yeah, so you have more grades, you're naturally going to have more enrollment. Part of what we learned is the MSBA is also going to look and make sure they agree. One of the things we talked about at the last meeting is they asked Greg and his team to submit a statement of interest related to Woodward based on what our plan was as a town, which is basically potential decommission of a school. And I think this would be part of the process of, from an educational policy perspective, do grades 2 through 5 belong together, both locally from our school administration team, but also, at the state level, they're going to look at comparable projects. But I think the other thing we need to keep in the back of our mind is we know this number is going to be large from a construction perspective. It doesn't matter whether we try to put 1 grade in a school, which obviously makes no sense from an efficiency perspective. The number is not going to be the easiest number to digest, whatever it ends up being. And that's assuming inflation cools a little bit and things stabilize a little bit. We may need to make tough decisions as a community of, can we absorb all of that, right? Like, as much as the educational policy may say this is the right number, we may need to show what those 2 different numbers are to get people comfortable with one decision over another. And you're going to have short-term, medium range, and long-term planning that goes into that, that philosophy. So I think that's part of this process, is there's going to be an educational component that goes far beyond the amount of square footage each child occupies, because it's either going to be an existing building or a new building, or an existing school that's, housing other grades. So I don't know, Greg, if you and anyone in your team would expand on that in any way, but I think it's a good question.
So I think I would just add that part of the work that we'll need to do, and we have started, is really thinking about the program, the types of programs we want to offer students. And I think, as Jason indicated, we've done 2 significant in-depth enrollment studies, one with RLS demographics that we're using to kind of move forward as projections. But through MSBA's process, it will also require its own enrollment studies, and we'll decide on what that number is. So I think the enrollment projections that you're seeing are our best estimates based on the studies that we've done, but that number will be verified and confirmed by MSBA as we move forward.
And Greg, that 598 number, that's 2 through 5 grades?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you know what the number would be if we didn't close the school? Roughly?
Subtract 170.
Okay. So like, this is basically the worst case scenario, which 950 looks about right. And then, best case scenario, and if we're a little bit smaller, right, the construction costs will come down a little bit.
All right, does that answer your question, or did you have any additional questions?
That clarifies it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the article itself? So for those of you that are newer to town meeting and how the process works, there's usually a lot of discussion around the wording in warrant language. However, we don't have a choice here. The language that we've been given is template from the MSBA. There's really no optionality in it except for the 950K. MSBA, as we've heard, did not give us that number. So I'm not sure there's much to debate on it unless we are dismissing MSBA and moving forward on our own, which I don't think we've had any discussion about that. However, we will have a conversation at a future meeting. I likely will invite Kathy back because she was instrumental to the process to talk about the cost of MSBA and the pros and cons, so everyone's aware of it as we move forward. It doesn't change a vote on a feasibility study. It just changes, it makes everyone aware that if we are delayed or removed at some point in time, what that looks like and the cost of time, value, and money. So there's an analysis that was done previously by the subcommittee that we'll get into at a future point. Are there any other questions on the 950 before I let John depart? Because we're going to go on to just how to educate the community on this and then take a vote. John, appreciate you joining us, and I will provide your contact information in the committee in case someone does something after the fact.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And just one other quick thing I didn't say is I sat in your chairs. I was on my school building committee in my town for middle high school for 4.5 years. awesome experience. And it's the exact same process. MSBA, they don't change, which is great. So good luck. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask anytime.
Thanks, John. Okay. So, Katura, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but obviously welcome, feedback from others as the school committee member that is here right now. I personally have heard very little discussion about this article. There's obviously a lot of discussion about other articles going into town meeting. I think there's two schools of thought: is people haven't looked at it or focused on it or focused on the amount, and we don't want to be caught off guard, or people have focused on it, may have some questions on the amount, but understand the general concept and direction of the community. So I don't want to overeducate, but I also don't want to be naive and all of us sit there flat-footed on town meeting floor. I think we clearly have comparable data that could be rejected. I liked Kathy's idea, but at the school committee level, and you may say I need to talk about this at the next public meeting with the broader committee, any thoughts on education to the community, particularly school-aged parents, on what this article means, what could happen with it, where we would go if there was successful funding?
So, yeah, no, we haven't talked about this as a committee. Our next meeting is Wednesday. So maybe that would probably be a good time for us. I don't know I don't think it's on the agenda specifically, although maybe I have to go back and look. But yeah, so we can talk about it. I do think I don't really have a good sense of, I haven't heard a lot of chatter about it either. And I don't have a good sense of why. I suspect it's just not on people's radar. And I also think that, and I'd be interested to hear what other community members, if they've heard people talking about it, I don't know, but I do think it would be a good idea to have a plan for kind of bringing people up to speed a little bit and what this is and how, why it's such a, what are we committing to and are we getting value out of this? And what value will we get out of it? So I do think we're going to need to do some education, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't think it's on people's radar is my sense. So I don't know if there's anyone else but I will make sure that we have a discussion on Wednesday about, see what the rest of the committee thinks. So yeah, I don't know what anybody else thinks.
So Katura, there is a placeholder on the agenda.
Okay.
So it can be discussed. And I would just add that part of the work that we've done over the past, I think, year with the school research subcommittee is work that we probably need to bring back to the forefront and present again. Because I think although a lot of work has been done, I think it's about timing. And I agree. I think people just need to have another refresher of the work that's been done and kind of the direction that was recommended and how this all connects. And I think people probably haven't really paid attention. And as the town meeting draws closer, they will start paying attention.
Jason, I had a comment.
Sorry, Mark, I'm just going to quickly go to Lisa. She had her hand up.
Okay.
Can I just get off mute? You're next in line.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Lisa.
All right, thank you. Just quickly, a couple of things. I've heard a lot of talk when this initially came out, when the space needs study was being done. There was a lot of talk of the dysfunction of Neary from parents that have had kids go through Neary or are in the process of going through Neary. I've heard no specific chatter about the number. I'm not even sure people are necessarily aware, but I think one thing we know is that anything that goes on with the schools that comes on a budget typically brings out and draws in a lot of people. So I think that's one of the challenges we have in the next month is getting the word out to all of the families of school-aged kids and, through all of our different schools. And, there's a variety of ways we can do it, but I agree that there hasn't been a whole lot of talk about the number, the 950, and exactly what it entails either. So That's it. Thank you.
Mark, your turn.
Yes, and I had retired from town meeting and other public meetings for a few years due to other commitments. So I can't give you a sense of what's happened in the last 5 years. But the last time these school projects came through in the late 90s, early 2000s, the biggest issue that was rattled around on the town meeting floor were projections. And that issue, and just as someone coming in fresh, I am absolutely thrilled that the town has had those discussions well in advance of us coming before the town meeting to do the feasibility study. I recall some of those town meetings were full of people, and all we seem to talk about is justifying those projections. And those discussions may be at us in the future when we come for the big vote. But I think it's important to stress all the work that's been done in advance, because I think that takes a lot of the sting out of it. And I think that's why you haven't seen much chatter on it. There were a lot of issues in the early 2000s with what we did to the schools. And there's always been a nagging feeling, why did we leave Neary out of the mix? And if anything, if somebody with gray hair like me is going to stand up, those are the issues that might come up, because there's a long history to some of these issues. I haven't heard much, and I think talking to my daughter and some of the other parents of kids, there really hasn't been that much. So I think from what I looked at the warrant, unless our article is going to change positions, I actually like where the article is positioned right now. And some of the more controversial things that'll come before town meeting are after us. There's a couple before us. And if town meeting works the way it did 30 years ago, the controversial ones have a tendency to bring out a lot of people. And then once they're done, you see a mad rush to the doors of people leaving the meeting. So it's probably good that we haven't had a lot of attention. But we really need to stress that there's nothing set in concrete, that no decisions have been made at this point to do Neary, or that's the project decision that we're making over the next year or two. And these are the funds needed to make some of those substantive decisions. That's all good. So I'm not surprised there isn't much discussion, because we went through some horrific discussions 20, 30 years ago, and no one wants to repeat that.
Andrew, you have your hand up. Hi, Jen. Good to see you.
Yeah, so but some of the things I've heard Jason. So I mean, the 950 I had question just because I hadn't seen the backup, but I think after looking at the data and running the numbers, I think 950 is fair for what we're looking to do. Some of the other feedback I had that Katura might and Greg might be good to bring to the school committee is in the Vertex report, I think it was $4 million to repair Neary. And I think it's one of those $1 million for a feasibility study, or we could spend $4 million to rehab it. I think it would be worth it in the next school committee meeting to kind of talk that out and get a sense that no matter what, that $4 million is not going to solve the problems of Neary, right? That's not what the school committee suggests or would want to go. Like, let's like, can we take that off the table? Because I would agree if that's on the table, almost a quarter of the cost of that for a feasibility study is a little bit high. So that was some of the feedback I had gotten from citizens of the town. But if the school committee, after reviewing the Vertex, kind of, yes, that would have been the cost to keep the footprint, but the building is too old. It won't work for what we need, yada, yada, yada. I think that removes that piece from the equation. And now we're looking at either a rehab of Neary, plus an expansion, a whole new school, right? Then it focuses it more on that, which then 950 for a feasibility study can make sense.
Do you have anything else, Andrew, on that before I go?
No, that's it.
Just point one thing out. So anyone that hasn't had a chance to read that report, it's $4 million for some key, I'll call it life safety type items, roofs, windows. I believe there's some electrical. That was a early on stages of COVID sort of estimate, not today's dollars. So I'll let I believe we've learned that roofing is up 20 to 30% alone since that was done. So but here's the punchline. It doesn't matter when it goes up 20%, 30%, or 100%, or it's neutral. If we actually spend that $4 million, we will trip all building code requirements to bring that building into code compliance, which is not estimated in that number. That means sprinkler systems. It means widening doorways for ADA compliance. It means that's why I think that part needs to be emphasized, because we can't change the value that's on the town's property record card. And unfortunately, when you have an asset that's fully depreciated, it usually doesn't go up that much in value. So we just need to keep that in the back of our mind too. I have no idea what that number is, but it's a number north. It's a big number. So I just wanted to point that out too, because I think it's buried in some fine print somewhere on page X number of that 100-page plus report. Sorry, Katura, I know you had your hand up, but I just wanted to reemphasize that.
No, it's a great point. And so what I was going to say, it sort of ties into that, which is that the whole picture of why we're going down this road is bigger than just, would it be worthwhile to have a new school? It really ties into all the town buildings and the capital plan and the plan for Woodward and all of that. And so I guess I more have a question than it's a comment and a question, which is how much of that do we want to bring into this also? Because from my understanding, the reason why it would make sense from the town perspective to use Woodward for town purposes is because there are all these other buildings that would require, that would also require similar type investments, right? So it's it's a big picture. And I bet that will come up if there are people sort of asking about this money and why are we looking at this and why are we going to build, looking or considering looking at building such a big school for all these grades. And we have, and people who have been following this know about the Woodward ideas, but it might make sense to build some of that into it too. And I don't know, I guess the reason I'm posing it as a question is because I did attend the meeting where the plan for Woodward was presented, or the initial plan, but I don't know many of the specifics. And I think a lot of that would have to come from the town side if we were going to include some of that.
Obviously, there's not a floor plan, right? There's some preliminary drafts, but I think that would go to the bullet points, whether we take Kathy's example she gave earlier of like 1 to 2 pages. Just listening to this, just a suggestion I'll throw out is, Katura, I think you and Jen and the school committee need to talk about this on Wednesday night of what you want your role to be. Just a reminder for anyone that hasn't been in this position before, our job is to educate on why this is being advanced, but advocacy is crossing a line a lot of the time, right? So we can't put a big Neary building committee says vote yes sort of flyer out there. But what you can say is you can educate what got us to this point, right? Some of the steps, whether it be extracting slides from publicly available data, and just being ready. So my suggestion would be that the school committee discuss it as the ultimate user of that particular building, and that a subgroup, maybe a member of one of the 2 school committee members, Greg, maybe you or a member of your administration, and someone from the town side go off and create a 1 or 2 pager to bring back to this committee for a vote. And we put it out there the week or so leading up to town meeting and just say, this is where we've been, this is where we've gone. A lot of us will be on hand to answer questions on the floor and, see what comes out of it. Obviously, there's a lot of sites that are available to us in town to educate, not advocate, educate, and just get the message out. And naturally, I think we've seen it already with some of the earlier presentations. You get people's raw reactions. And I'm not looking for, right, like you're not going to get the round of applause, this is the greatest idea, but what you're going to do, which leads into some of the one other point I wanted to discuss tonight is FAQs. What don't people know because either it wasn't clear the messaging, they haven't followed along the way, or they're reading the messaging a different way than it was intended. So that would be my proposal of how we round it out, absent feedback from the school committee on Wednesday night. I don't know, thoughts on that?
I think that sounds good. I like it.
So any other feedback on that piece? Who from the town side do we want? I'll let Katura, you, Jen, and Greg and the school committee figure that piece out. But I guess Andrew, Lisa, or myself are the reps from other boards or committees. Does anyone have a strong preference? Just again, it's to bring it back to the committee. It's not obviously to message on behalf of the committee.
So Jason, you've kind of been down this path before where many of us have not. And I think I'll speak for myself. I'm looking for you for a lot of leadership on this. I wasn't part of the whole discussion as Marcus talked about back in the early 2000s. I was a newbie to Southborough then. So, I mean, I think you know the path through public safety, kind of how to reach people, what people really want to know, because I do think there's a large segment of the population that's not aware of really any of this. And that tends to happen an awful lot. So not that I'm volunteering you for anything, I do delegate well. If you would be willing to, work with Katura, I know you guys have had a great relationship in the past. If you would be willing to do that, I would highly recommend that, just based on, Jason, the path you've already gone down with the Public Safety Building Committee.
Andrew, are you okay with that, or you want a different path?
Full agreement.
Okay. And I look forward to where the residents at large can, you're on deck for the big one someday. Okay, so let's connect offline after we hear the conversation at the school committee on Wednesday night. The other thing I'll throw out, Jen and Katura, is I know, I'm sure everyone combs through Greg's email in great depth on Fridays at 4 o'clock, but I know it's probably coming out earlier this week, but obviously given people with the extended spring break with the religious holiday, I'm thinking like just a headline like Neary building feasibility to appear as article, whatever, wherever you finalize it, Lisa, tomorrow night. Do you have questions? And just have like a 2-line form. Again, I'm sure it's going to get lost and not a lot of traction this particular week, but if we can run that for like a week or 2 leading up, I think it will guide at least the parent community, what questions are coming out of there. We obviously have a much larger demographic that we need to reach, both parents that aren't in the schools yet, but also the significant number of residents that are beyond using the schools in the community. Any other feedback on any of this? Do we want to take a position tonight on the 950, or do you want to wait for that formal document? Obviously, this position doesn't go in the warrant. There's no rush to do it. People may want to digest some of the things they've heard tonight. I just will open the floor to see people's temperature at this point on it.
Jason, if I can make a suggestion, and Andrew, this is for you. I know advisory hasn't taken a position on this. So I don't know how comfortable you are taking a position prior to advisory. That's my only concern with doing it tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I can always take a position whenever I get forced to do one, but yeah, I don't see there's no real rush for us to do it now.
Okay. I'm good with that.
And Lisa, has select board voted to support?
We did.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. We'll move it to the next meeting. So the next item 7 on our agenda was start development of FAQ document. I'm thinking this process leading up to town meeting will naturally lead to a lot of FAQs that we can use through various parts of the process. In everyone's free time, I'd strongly encourage, because this is how I've kind of gotten up to speed on other school projects, is look at some other towns. You know, you can either pick neighboring communities or others. Most have really good websites, again, to educate on, you know, what were the hot button issues in their particular community? Why were people opposed to either? Obviously, numbers people are going to be opposed to no matter what number we come in with. Even if you say you can build a school for $1 million, there'll be resistance, I'm sure, at some point. But just what are the issues? What are the downstream impacts, especially given the community-wide nature of this potential project, as Katura continues to remind us, you know, of all the other impacts. So that's just a running list. I would strongly recommend all of you, regardless of your phase of involvement in this, start to think about what those questions are. And if you just have like a stream of conscious, let's collect them, and then we can figure out how we're actually going to, who's going to draft them. Jen Primack, before I go to public comment, did you just want to introduce yourself for the benefit of the committee? And obviously you can go back through our last video if you don't know anyone else. Some of the others on the line that are newer to our group.
Sure. Thank you. And sorry, I apologize for being late. I'm on clinical call on Mondays, every other Monday. So I'm Jen Primack. I'm on the Southborough K-8 school committee, and it's a pleasure to finally be able to, some of you I know already, but it's nice to be able to meet the rest of you on the committee. And I have a child who's in 5th grade, going into 6th grade next year.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment? All right. So Jen, apologies, we didn't know about your Monday night commitment when we set Monday nights as our, obviously we are not going to meet next week. It likely will take the week after vacation for the subgroup to kind of bring something forward. Town meeting is not until the 4th. And all we need to do is be prepared for what we would put up if there was questions. The moderator is holding a pre-town meeting. I don't know the format of which he is allowing presentations, not allowing presentations on each article, but I think I have to go as a member of Capital because of the other articles on. So between myself or Lisa as chair of the select board, we will get information on that. So I'm really looking, I've narrowed down to May 2nd as a potential meeting date. Again, hopefully it's a short meeting. Hopefully we've started to hear, maybe there's just general support and we need to, or what the questions are, but I just wanted to calendar it just in case. So we have, take the formal position that we didn't take tonight and just review any documents that could be presented if we need to defend a position. So any objections to that date?
Jason, just a question, not so much a question on the date.
Sure.
So is there any thought process to having a handout potentially of some of the facts at town meeting? Or is May 2nd really cutting it pretty close to get something printed? I mean, I guess if it's in a regular format, it's something I can probably have run off at the townhouse. I mean, if we're talking like a 1-page sheet potentially, I just think having something there, whether you put it on a screen as a presentation as well, something that voters can read and then have. Just a thought. I don't know what your thought is about that.
If we're doing a front to back 8.5 by 11, we should be able to print them by the 5th.
The only thing I completely agree, there's probably a way to figure that out. The moderator has sometimes, at least from past practice, and it's the same moderator, had a requirement that anything that was going to be available within the hall had to be previewed by him by a certain date. So that's my only concern with that. Otherwise, but I can call or email Paul and just figure out if he's going to have that role. But let's just assume he's not going to have the role for a second. Does that date work?
Craig, that is the night of Northborough School Committee.
Yeah, not all of us would need to attend, so.
Yeah, we'd have to divide and conquer, Jason.
Okay. And that's a 6:30 start too? Okay. Let's tentatively do it. And then once we hear what the school committee thinks on Wednesday, the broader group of 5 with the administration team, if we think we're going to be able to accelerate something, we'll come back for another date. Does that make sense? Okay. Just procedurally, the one thing I did learn for those that are on the Southborough Town email is Jay Montijo did send an email that early on in the process to say that you were added to the Neary building group. Apparently you have to actually click in there and it opens everything, which is why some of you didn't get the email. So I will do another email to the Southborough domains only. If I'm looking at Andrew, Jen, Anurada, Lisa, and Mark. If you don't get an email from me after this meeting, just send me an email tonight and we'll have Jay figure it out tomorrow. I think on the school side, we're good. You know, it's amazing, right? Crossing, that's working. So, all right. The chosen platform for now is we're going to use the town website to post our documents, which will serve 2 purposes. One, for people that want to start following us, we'll be able to see everything we're seeing. And 2, everyone will be able to kind of go in there, and then it will make Andrew's life a lot easier when he submits our minutes at the end of every meeting as well. Unfortunately, the Google Microsoft thing is far more complicated than you would think. So I'll just leave my technological piece aside for now. Is there any other business that anyone wants to conduct tonight? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, roll call vote. Braccio,
Aye.
Davis,
Aye.
Donato,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
Kemka, Primack,
Aye.
Bath,
Aye.
and Malinowski. I was awful alphabetically there, but you were moving on my screen. So have a good night, everyone, and see you on the 2nd, unless you hear from me otherwise. And we'll get back to you on a date for later that week before.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.